L.A. Back to late night in the Midlands. L.A.MARZILLI, how are you, my
Out in the
friend?
Midlands, I'm good, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you tonight. A lot going on in our world, isn't there?
Oh my gosh, too much. How long are we on for? An hour?
Yeah, we got
Great.
you. We got you for an hour tonight, and L.A. I thought we'd start with a little bit of background, briefly, and
Okay.
what got you so interested in all this? Because obviously, you have to have an interest to get where you've gotten with it. You've done a lot of work in these areas.
Well, that's true. Right from the get-go, 35 years ago, I was drawn to the biblical prophetic narrative. In other words, those passages of Scripture which call out events in the future. Many of those events have not happened even now as we speak. For instance, the construction of a third temple, the revealing of the Antichrist, the anti-Messiah. Those are just two prophetic events. The Ezekiel 38 war, the Psalm 83 war, the Isaiah 17 destruction of Damascus, to name a few more. Those prophetic passages have not been fulfilled yet. And I was drawn to the biblical prophetic narrative 35 years ago when I first came to Jesus and confessed him as my Lord and Savior, and my life has never been the same since. I was always interested in that. It just kind of blew me away that there was someone outside space-time as we know it, and just like the Bible said, who could tell us the beginning before the end, call out the beginning before the end and the end before the beginning. And I just found that absolutely incredible, and I was drawn to it. And so the idea of prophecy and understanding prophecy and knowing the prophetic narrative from the Bible basically has colored everything I do. Most of the books have a prophetic thread to them. The new book, obviously, and of course Watchers 9, both of them are entitled Days of Chaos, but they deal with different subject matters. So it's not like they don't really overlap that much. For instance, in Watchers 9, we talk about electromagnetic pulse weapons with Dr. Brooks Agnew. I also touch on that in the book. I discussed very much in the book volcanic activity, and in Watchers 9, we interviewed a man by the name of Alvin Conway, who's got a record-breaking blog called The Extinction Protocol, and Alvin talks about volcanoes. But what's interesting is both projects are really very much standalone projects, and you can watch one and enjoy the book without necessarily having the other one. But we recommend both at the same time.
I see. So, Last Days of Chaos. Now, would that be space related? Because always the topic of Planet X comes up, and people, no matter what guest I have on, I will always get messages. Ask him about Planet X. Does he know about Planet X? And so this chaos that's happening now. I mean, we've got a lot going on. We've got everything from the weather to wars. Can't blame the wars on something like Planet X, I don't think, but. The weather and stuff. Is it? Would this be related to something off of planet, or is this just an evil force that has gripped our planet?
Great question, and you're right. Planet X, as my business partner and producer, director of the Watcher series, Richard Shaw, would tell you that Planet X just won't go away. I mean, it just doesn't go away. We interviewed Marshall Masters in one of our Watchers years ago during the 2012, and Marshall was convinced that Planet X was coming in and we would see it in 2012. It was the end of the world. Well, it didn't happen. Gil Broussard, who is perhaps in some ways one of the foremost expositors on Planet X. We interviewed him for Watchers 9. It's an incredible interview. I'm a skeptic, and here's why. Fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, right? And I got fooled with the 2012 thing, which never happened. We didn't see anything. In fact, Richard even showed us in the Watchers, in one of our Watchers, how you create lens flares and what lens flares are. Lots of stuff out there, but they're lens flares. They're camera anomalies. Some of them are just atmospheric anomalies. I'm not seeing any Planet X. Look, if it's there, and Gil Broussard is correct, we're supposed to see this thing in March. I just received an email fairly recently in the last couple of days saying, oh, guess what? Gil's calculations are wrong. We're going to see it in January. Look, the bottom line is something is going on. We all understand that. I think there's a supernatural component to everything that we're seeing. I'm a frank supernaturalist. And I don't blame it on Planet X. I blame it on the dark agenda of the fallen cherub, Satan. The rebellion happened millennia ago. We don't know how far back it goes. I think it's a lot farther back than most people want to believe. But I digress. The bottom line is, I think that we're looking at supernatural forces which are operating on the planet. Oh, Ellie, that's ridiculous. You're trying to tell me supernatural forces and volcanic activity? Absolutely, why not? And here's the reason. When we get back into the biblical prophetic narrative, we read that in the book of Job specifically, that the fallen cherub is walking around the face of the earth, and he sees Job, and he brings up Job. And then we see whirlwinds that happen. Great winds come in and blow the house down. We see all of a sudden that this band of Sabaeans decide to just attack Job's children. Job is stricken with this horrible disease, and on and on it goes. Look, I don't want to give the devil too much credit. On the other hand, I want to underestimate what we're dealing with here. The fact that the volcanic activity is waking up is alarming. The fact that, and Jesus warns us of this. He doesn't say anything about Planet X. He just tells us there's a laundry list, and this is what both the Days of Chaos, the book, and the Watchers 9 Days of Chaos is basically built on. The words of Jesus, which tell us, in no uncertain terms, do not be deceived. First thing out of his mouth. Do not be deceived. Many will come in my name and claim that I am the Messiah. That in itself is an absurd statement to make, because 2,000 years ago, there is no church. There's no PR firm. There's nothing. There's no stained glass windows, monks with funny haircuts, rosary beads, nunneries, none of this stuff. Confessional boxes, Billy Graham, Christian TV, nothing exists. There's Judaism, which is basically locked into what is Israel today. It's pretty much there. The temple is still working when Yeshua is there. And, of course, that's the one time we see that he really gets ticked off. He makes a whip and he drives the money changers out of a temple. But, again, I digress. The bottom line is there's no PR firm talking about this, and yet he says, many will come in my name and say, I'm the Messiah. Don't believe him. Don't be deceived. And then he gives us this laundry list of points to consider. Wars and rumors of wars, famines, pestilence, earthquakes in diverse places, troublesome times. His words. And that's a very dire warning. And that statement is incredibly just pregnant with meaning. There's so much going on in that statement, and it points us to, wow, earthquakes in diverse places? Well, 2,000 years ago, there's no way to track earthquakes in diverse places. If you lived in the Galilee or in Jerusalem at the time, how would you know about an earthquake, a 9.0 in Fukushima? You wouldn't. But today, in modernity, the Fukushima earthquake happens. We watch the tidal wave come in live via satellite. Everything's hooked up. So now we know about earthquakes in diverse places. And here's the deal. This is what Yeshua, these are his words, not mine, warning us of what it'll be like right before his return at the end of the age. And he says, when you see these things, don't freak out. Look up, because your redemption's coming. I'm coming back. My return is imminent. And so I look at everything, and we're going to talk about some of those things in our little conversation tonight, or the time that we have together. Look at the coming financial collapse that we keep hearing about. Look at the ongoing Fukushima disaster. Think about the wars and rumors of wars happening on a global level. Think about the false messiahs that are on the planet right now claiming to be the second coming. Look at the rise of lawlessness. Think about the fish and animal die-offs. Wonder about the possibility of an electromagnetic pulse weapon being used in this country. The ongoing volcanic activity, the signs in the heavens and earth, the so-called Marian apparitions, which we're seeing. And, of course, one of my favorites, the ongoing burgeoning UFO phenomena with the abduction scenario, the creation of hybrids, which just won't go away. And you mix all this together, and you've got the days of chaos. Where am I going wrong here?
Oh, exactly. I was saying at the beginning of the show, no matter what your belief system rides on, no matter what ballpark you're in, you cannot deny that these things are happening. And that's the bottom line. I mean, they're happening. And Fukushima, really concerning, because this is something that I think, it's very concerning. I mean, people have called me a fearmonger for saying it could wipe us all out, but I still believe that it could. I think it's that, that much of a catastrophe where in the long term it could cause a whole lot more problems than it already is. But how did these people know these things back then, LA?
Well, I mean, the only person who knew these things was Yeshua. Yeshua was calling it out, before anything happens. He calls it out a priori, well in advance, and he does it all through his time on Earth. We are looking at someone outside space-time as we know it, who calls out the end before the beginning and beginning before the end, just like Isaiah tells us. I alone am God, I am He. I am the only one who can do this. And so that prophetic thread that happens all through our Bibles, really, in some way, it's a stamp of authenticity from God Himself, so, telling us that, wait a minute, I'm the real one. There's a lot of guys out here claiming to be God. A lot of religions say that they're the way, but guess what? No one calls out the end before the beginning and the beginning before the end with 100% accuracy and great specificity. And I think that's why it's there. There are some prophecies in Nostradamus. He's about, and I'm being generous here, 60% accuracy, and the rest of them is not. We know that the medal of a true prophet is 100% accuracy 100% of the time, and I deal with this in my book, The Cosmic Chess Match. Prophets like Nostradamus are operating with a familiar spirit. They're using a technique called scrying, where they look into a bowl and they see images and they write those images down. That's called scrying. We are forbidden to do that from Deuteronomy because we're contacting entities, basically fallen angels in the second heaven. They have knowledge. They can see through time further than we can, but they're not all knowing. There's only one who knows all and sees all, and that's the God of the Bible. And that's what sets that tome apart from any other book on this planet. When I go to conferences, I say to them, what separates our book from any other book? Jesus! Nope. Sorry, that's not it. And people will say all these things, and finally someone will say prophecy, and I go, that's it. Our book, the Bible, has that thread of prophecy from Genesis to Revelation. No other book on the planet has it. And most people don't talk about it. The churches, for the most part, never mention the prophetic narrative throughout the Bible. Without that, how would we have known when Yeshua would ride in and declare himself king? And that happens at the triumphal entry, which is prophesied in Daniel hundreds of years earlier. It'll be 490 years before Messiah will come riding in. And then Yeshua, as Chuck Metzler says, sends two of his disciples ahead to get the colt that's never been ridden. And he allows himself to be presented to Israel as a king. And then shortly afterwards, and this should be chilling to those out there who are rolling their eyeballs and don't want to talk about prophecy. Yeshua says to them, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I would have gathered you as a hen gathers her chicks, but you did not know the day of your visitation. I mean, that's like chilling, because they had the scroll of Daniel. All they needed to do was to know and understand that from the time that the decree goes out to rebuild the temple until the Messiah comes, there'll be 490 years, I'm paraphrasing. They knew it. It was right there. And this is why Yeshua, Jesus, rides in on that colt as a king, because he's fulfilling that prophecy to absolutely the split second. It is an astounding event, and yet Israel collectively misses it. How much more will the church today be held accountable when we've got Bible software, Bible TV, Bible this, Bible that, numerous translations all over the place, and yet the pastors, for the most part, I'm painting with a broad brush here, for the most part ignore, which is 1/3 of the biblical narrative, which is the prophetic biblical narrative. And they don't talk about it, and they don't teach it. And this is why we wrote the book and produced the movie Watchers 9, Days of Chaos, the book by the same title, Days of Chaos, because I believe that we're in that window of time that is unlike any other window in all of history. And it's talking about all these events lead up to the time of Jacob's trouble, the 7-year tribulation period. And that, of course, unless those days were shortened, no flesh would survive.
And that is why I tell people you have to do your own research, because if you leave it in the hands of others, they'll only tell you what they want you to know. And that's pretty much what the churches do. They only tell you what, and again, I'm doing the broad brush thing here too. Maybe there are some good ones out there, but I'll be totally honest here. Anytime I've gone to church, it's put me to sleep, and it shouldn't do that. I mean, they're not teaching what they should be. So let me ask you this, L.A. Who is controlling our planet? And I mean, I'm not talking about the basic humans. You hear the Rothschilds and this and that, and I'm sure they got a lot to do with it. But who's behind the curtain? I mean, there's this other dimension. If you've got the good, there's obviously the bad, and the bad seems to have a dark cloud around us right now. And I'm not going to say it's demonic or what have you, or Satan. I don't know, but where's this dark energy hiding?
Well, the dark energy has a name, and it is Ha-Satan. He is the fallen cherub. He comes to rob, kill, and destroy. He's the prince of this world. That's all right there in the biblical narrative. And there's a chapter in the book, chapter 19. It's called 9/11, a Luciferian Conspiracy. And we don't have time to really, delve into all of that.
Right.
But I remember when I wrote Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, and that came out in 2007, I was Mr. Party Line. I went right down, the hijackers all came from Saudi Arabia, planes hit the building, and those buildings collapsed at free fall speed due to fires. Okay, I believe the official version. Someone then sent me, when they read the book, and said, L.A., have you seen this? And I looked at Building 7 collapse. I wasn't even aware. And thank you, our ridiculous media, who never talks about Building 7, never tells anyone about Building 7, just shows the trade centers. Look, buildings do not collapse at free fall speed. And I remember when I saw the collapse of the Twin Towers, the first words out of my mouth were, that looks like controlled demolition. Those were the first words out of my mouth. I turned to my wife and I said, that looks like controlled demolition. And when I saw Building 7, there were no doubts in my mind. And every year during the anniversary of 9/11, there's a little a moving JPEG that I show showing the free fall collapse in real time of Building 7. That building collapsed at free fall speed. That's impossible. It's a physical impossibility. And this is why over 1,700 architects and engineers have coalesced to try to create a climate, a mood where Congress will actually look at the events of 9/11 and call for an independent investigation. All that there is a dark agenda that is attempting to bind the entire planet under a one world religious system, under a one world government. As George Bush Sr. says, a new world order. I mean, that's what he tells us, and it's like, we don't want to hear that, and this is what's happening in Europe now. With the advance of all these so-called refugees, we are witnessing the conquering of Europe, because you can't send 1 million people back. Where are they going to go? I mean, you can if you have the willpower to do it and build walls and keep them out, because they're just going to keep trying to come back. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia, which has a tent city, which can house 3 million people, and by the way, that tent city is air-conditioned, won't take one of these refugees. Gee, isn't that telling? Instead, they turn to Germany and they say, well, instead of taking refugees, we'll come there and build 200 mosques in Germany. How does that sound? And, of course, when they do that, it'll be the utter Islamification of Europe, which is the end game. That's what they want. That's what the Saudis want. I believe that the Saudis bought the election in 2008. I believe that we have a Muslim in the White House, with all due respect.
Oh, me
I believe
too.
He was put in there with Saudi money. And, the chickens have come home to roost. Isn't it interesting how, with all due respect to our president, how President Barack Hussein Obama, when Mohammed the clock boy, I forget his name, I think it's Ahmad Mohammed, but whatever his name is, the clock boy builds the clock, and it's like, it's like, oh, Islamophobia. He brings a briefcase that looks like a bomb to school. And he didn't build a clock. He took the innards of one clock and set it in a briefcase. He didn't make a clock. And the whole thing is just one big setup. And it turns out his father is an Islamic activist. Well, here's the deal. Isn't it interesting how POTUS invites the guy to the White House, but we never see him invite, what about the Christians who are being massacred in Syria and massacred throughout the Middle East? That never happens. Those
That's right.
people aren't invited to the White House. But, Ahmed Mohammed, boy, he gets that invite real quick. And
Oh
I take
yeah.
umbrage with that.
Oh yeah. Well, this president's been an absolute disaster for us. Now, for doing his actual job he was put in there to do, he's doing a great job. I mean, he's turned the people and the police against each other. He's, every time somebody of color winds up dead, oh well, they look just like my children, and these cops are horrible, and and he's a Muslim terrorist. He was put in there to destroy America and take it down from the inside out. I always said the way to take this country down is from the inside out, and they're doing it.
Absolutely, that's exactly what we see. And I find that incredibly alarming. How the media is completely in the tank. How no one, I won't say no one, because isn't it interesting that the GOP, the top three candidates are Trump, Dr. Ben Carson, and Carly Fiorina, all outside the Beltway, and the handpicked the global elitist candidate was obviously Jeb Bush, and it was interesting to watch Fox News immediately get in the tank with Jeb. And even before any of this started happening, they were pushing Jeb on their agenda, which lets me know exactly where they're at, who's controlling them.
Look what they did for Hillary, too. I mean, did you see that fiasco?
Well, with what?
With Hillary Clinton. You had Bernie pretty much rolling out the red carpet for her, CNN rolling out the red carpet for her. So, yeah.
It's exactly what it is. She's anointed. They want her to be president, and I think the American people, unless there's absolute nonsense at the polling boxes, and we've seen that before, where the tally is what it is. I got a hunch that Trump's going to get the nomination, and I got a hunch he's going to win by a super mandate. I really believe that. Most people in this country have absolutely fed up with politics as usual and the Beltway nonsense, and the fact that Boehner, the Speaker of the House, cries at a drop of a hat that we elect an all Republican Senate and House of Representatives, and it's might as well. I mean, these guys just lay down and do Obama's will. I mean, there's no pushback. I was told that if I had a plan, I could keep my plan. Guess what? I couldn't keep my plan. So is that a deliberate lie? I mean, it sure sounds like it to me when someone tells me you can keep your plan if you have a plan. No, I can't. I can't keep my plan at all. And it's I take umbrage with that because you lied to me. You told me something that wasn't true. That's called a lie. And I think you knew about that when you stood up and you told us that. And, here we are. And I'm going to switch gears a little bit here.
Okay.
The wars and rumors of wars. We look at what's going on in Afghanistan, 14 years, $1 trillion opium harvest, and then we look at Tsar Vladimir Putin riding into the Middle East, 150,000 Russian troops. Now we've got the Chi-Coms coming up with him in Syria, that war mortar port that the Ruskies have always wanted, propping up Bashar al-Assad, who's nothing more than a puppet. The Ruskies also giving the Iranians the S-300 missile system. I mean, this is like, if this isn't the nascent beginnings of World War III, I don't know what are. I mean, I am alarmed at what I see. It is absolutely unprecedented. And our president dithers. This guy, and I'm just going to quote Charles Krauthammer here. Charles Krauthammer calls him the great amateur. And that's exactly what POTUS, President Barack Hussein Obama is. With all due respect, he's an amateur. And I don't know how this man was ever elected. He has no accomplishments at all. He's never spent one day, as far as I know, in a business of his own doing. He was a community organizer, and he's been on the public dole forever. And so he's also a socialist, and that's obvious to see. And the idea, the fact that this man is elected, and somehow here we are, he goes up against someone like Tsar Vladimir Putin, who is one of the wiliest politicians ever to come down the pike. And this man has held the reins of power literally for decades and continues to do so. And he is being literally unopposed in the Middle East. And at the same time, the Chi-Coms are now invested. And the Chinese have not been in the Middle East since the Mongols 800 years ago. So this is what we are looking at is unprecedented. The Islamic refugee influx into Europe Absolutely unprecedented. We haven't seen anything like this since Charles Martel and the Gates of Vienna. And both of those incidents, separated by hundreds of years, they turned back the Islamic hordes. Now, Merkel is just welcoming into Germany. But wait, there's pushback because the people realize that these immigrants aren't thankful. They're not coming there attempting to embrace a different way of life. They want Sharia law. They want Islam in these countries in Europe. And this is what it's too late. It's over. The only way is to actually deport them out of the country. And the last time I've seen that really happen, and this is interesting, was at the end of World War II. The Jews who were trying desperately to get out of Europe and go to Israel were turned back by the British fleet. Were turned back by the British fleet and reinterned in many instances back into the very concentration camps which had been liberated. Now, these camps were no longer concentration camps. They were being fed and sanitary conditions and all that. I get that. But they were still interred. They were in camps, relocation camps, because the British government would not allow them to go to Israel. So, before everybody goes, whoa, we can't do that. Wait a minute. The Brits already did it. Where there's a will, there's a way. And you can say this, and I'm not advocating this, but isn't it interesting how the American government, in the Trail of Tears, relocated an entire people, the Cherokee people, because it was not in the America's best interest, the government's best interest, to have these Native Americans, these indigenous people who were here before we were, to remain in their locale. So they got up and they moved them. So don't start telling me that Europe and the countries in Europe can't relocate these so-called refugees, and most of them are males under 30. Gee, sounds like an invasion force to me. Watch the chaos that ensues in the coming months in Europe. Watch the chaos. That's if our government or our media, our media controlled by our government will actually report on what's going on over there.
Oh yeah, it is an invading force, and that's the same thing here. We've seen a little bit, a little taste of it when they said, "Oh, all the refugee children who are coming over the border here in the United States." Remember that? Yeah. Well, and it wasn't just children. These children were being brought in by gangsters and terrorists, and they opened the floodgates for these guys, and that's what they're going to do again. Obama wants to bring, how many did he say? Something like 100,000 of them.
Yeah, I mean that will, and then what of course the Democrats will do, they'll allow these people to vote in the next election. You can't make this stuff up, and this is why the American people are looking at Trump and Fiorina and Dr. Ben Carson, because they've had it with the Jeb Bushes. They've had it with the Barack Hussein Obamas. They've had it with the John Boehners and the Mitch McConnell. They've had it with the same old good old boy nonsense network. They've had it with the onerous taxes, which we are forced to pay year after year after year. The state and the federal tax. Now we've got Obamacare. They've had it with a group of so-called Supreme Court justices who, by judicial fiat, create law and say, oh, now we've got gay marriage in all 50 states, thereby breaking with thousands of years of Judeo-Christian morals and ethics, which was marriage by one man and one woman. I mean, this is unprecedented times we're living in. Look, if these aren't the days of chaos, Michael, I don't know what is. I mean, we are in such chaotic times I can barely keep up with it at this point. Barely keep up with it. It's unprecedented.
Oh, absolutely. And somebody said, if you want war, then vote for Trump. Folks, we're in war, and we're not.
What are you talking about? If you want war, vote for Trump. What a bunch of nonsense that is. George W. Bush told us that we're going to build a wall and keep out the terrorists. That's what he told us. Guess what? The border is still porous as ever, and Barack Hussein Obama keeps it that way and won't allow law enforcement to do their work. Trump's, and I love it, going to build a wall and keep them out, and that's what needs to be done. That's what needs to be done. Build the wall, blow up the tunnels, get the terrorists out of here. And I love what Trump says. He says, day one, the gang members go. Yes! Yes!
Exactly.
Finally, someone's addressing it. Day one, the gang members go. Yes. Get them out of the country. that are holding entire sections of Los Angeles, Chicago, San Francisco. Every single major city is controlled by these guys, the MS-13 gangs, and they are ruthless, and they are killers. And what does Trump do? He stands up and he goes, first day, they're out of here. I can't wait. I can't wait. Finally, somebody who's going to deal with what's going on here.
Yeah, I just hope nothing happens to him because they're not giving him any protection. They gave Obama a ton of protection, but they're not giving Trump any.
Nope. Weird, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it kind of makes sense in my world, unfortunately.
Mine too.
Yeah, so somebody asked if you could talk about the significance of the temple in Israel, and what do you think all is going to happen there? Because I guess, people look and say, well, they'll never get away with doing that. But will they?
The prophecy, once again, the biblical prophetic narrative states unequivocally that temple is going to be rebuilt. Now, there are people who say, well, maybe it doesn't mean literally. Baloney. It means literal. You can't have the Antichrist go into the temple and be worshipped as God unless there is a temple. And unlike those with replacement theology who try to tell us that in AD 70 this was done when the Romans came in, or Antiochus Epiphanes, that fulfilled that prophecy. I don't believe that. I think it's a bunch of nonsense. This is future. That temple will be rebuilt. The Temple Mount Faithful have already constructed most of the artifacts and implements that are needed for the sacrifices to begin. The Israelis now have a location of a red heifer, and on it goes. At some point, that Temple Mount, which is over 40 acres, will be divvied up, and the Jews will be allowed to rebuild it. Look. People go, well, that sounds impossible. Let's go back a few years ago. How many people saw the Arab Spring come? Nobody. Nobody saw it coming. In the meanwhile, countries all over North Africa were toppled, and the despots who controlled them, like Gaddafi and Hosni Mubarak, all these people just gone overnight. And now we see Assad is holding up under the Arab Spring, but no one saw the Arab Spring coming. The point I'm trying to make is this, that when the Bible tells us something, when the Bible tells us in the latter days, I will regather Israel from the four corners of the earth and put them back in their homeland. Before 1948 or before the 20th century, people would read that and say, well, that's impossible. How is that ever going to happen? And yet in 1948, on the ashes of the Holocaust, which are then the birth pains of the formation of the state of Israel, it happens. What was written will come to pass. What was foretold will unfold. That's a quote that I came up with a while back. What was written will come to pass. What was foretold will unfold. And that's precisely what we're seeing. The biblical prophetic narrative is 100% accurate. You can hang your collective hat on it. Guaranteed.
All right. Well, L.A., what I'm going to do now is take questions from our listeners. Now, they got two ways of doing it. You can either call in at 803-392-4LNM, that's 4566, or you can private message me in the chat room, and several of you have done that. Also, I take questions in my email, my late night in the Midlands at yahoo.com email. So I've got questions there as well. But the chat room's the easiest way. Okay, one listener asked, what is your take on Jade Helm? And I personally think it's still going on, even though they say it's over.
I think Jade Helm is preparation for what is coming. It's a dress rehearsal. It's to get the military set up for total anarchy. Which is what will happen when martial law is declared. If there's an electromagnetic pulse weapon, an EMP, which is used in this country, which knocks out the electrical grid, you will have absolute, utter chaos in this country. It's interesting how the biblical prophetic narrative never mentions America. We're not in there. And some people will use this, well, it just goes to show you the Bible's not accurate. Or maybe America's taken down. Maybe America is not in biblical prophecy because we're not in biblical prophecy. Ever think about that? And so I think that Jade Helm is alarming. I'm very unsettled by it. And this is why at the onset of every shooting, our president comes on record and says this: we need stricter gun control. Now he's saying he's threatening by executive order for gun control to round up the guns. Every despot throughout world history the first thing they do is round up the weapons. They round up the guns. The Turks did it, and look what happened to the Armenians. 1.2 million Armenians marched to their death. The Nazis did it in World War II, and look what happened to 15 million people who perished in the ovens of Germany. Look at what Stalin did and the 60 million people perishing in the gulags. And look what the Chaikovs have done with 80 million people dying in their gulag system. Look at North Korea. It's always the same thing. Look at Islam, which is very, very interesting. This came across my desk today. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Sharia law, Allah's word, is the government. 2, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed upon. That's our Second Amendment. 2, no Muslims cannot possess weapons of any kind. 3, no unreasonable searches and seizures. That's the Fourth Amendment. 3, seize land, houses, and wealth of non-Muslims. That's all from the Quran. 4, this is the Eighth Amendment. No cruel and unusual punishment. What does Sharia say? Cut off the hands of thieves or fornication, flog them with 100 lashes. 5, Congress shall allow the freedom of speech, First Amendment. The Quran, you shall not insult Allah or his prophet. 6, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, First Amendment. 6, those who reject Islam must be killed. Now, that's the difference between the Constitution and the Sharia law. And what's interesting is Dr. Ben Carson recently stood up and said, no Muslim should be president. And immediately CAIR, the Council of American Islamic Relations, stood up and said, well, Ben Carson should immediately be taken off the list here. He should not be allowed to run for president. And Carson won't back down, and he's right, because Sharia law and a devout Muslim will always opt and always choose Sharia over the Constitution. So Carson's right. Sharia will always trump our Constitution in any Muslim. And so a Muslim literally cannot be president of the United States. I think Carson's words are absolutely incredible. And already he's getting pushback. We are in a culture war in this country. And the American people need to stand up and for what our Constitution allowed us with the freedoms. We should never forget that. We should understand that Jade Helm could be certainly seen as a threat, and we should never, under any circumstances at all, relinquish our Second Amendment. And isn't it funny how these weasel, media people who have no idea of the historic implications of rounding up the guns and what it meant. They have no sense of history, and immediately with one of these school things happen, when some kid gets, some nutcase walks in and blows away a dozen people or more, round up the guns. Why not give the teachers the guns? That's what Trump said, and I blogged about that before Trump said it. I'm sure it's, I'm sure Donald Trump doesn't go to my blog. Let's put it that way.
Well, you might. You never know.
I'm sure he doesn't do that. But I find it interesting that he had exactly the same solution that I had. The solution is to arm the teachers. Because if you round up the guns, the bad guys are going to find a way to get the guns anyway. That's not going to stop anything. You arm the teachers. You give them gun safety and gun courses if they're afraid of it. You show them how to use a handgun. You arm your people, and guess what? The shooters are going to think twice about coming to your school or your mall or wherever you are, or your church. If everybody's packing, sorry. And it's interesting. There's a scene which will be on my blog tomorrow that came from Israel, and this nutcase of an imam is calling for Muslims to stab Israelis. And then now all of a sudden we've seen this rise of stabbings all throughout Israel. So this crazed maniac runs over a rabbi and another pedestrian and then rams the vehicle into a lamppost. And he gets out of the car, he's got a meat cleaver. And he immediately starts hacking the rabbi just over and over again, just hacking the guy to death.
Jesus.
And then he goes and does the same thing to another person. Well, in Israel, they don't kowtow to this stuff, and they're not too much for political correctness. Less than a minute after this guy, you can watch it. It's less than a minute. This guy is shot by a police officer, because that's how they live over there. Because they know radical jihad is everywhere, and this is what they do. And this perpetrator is finally gunned down. Not word one about it in our media. They don't talk about that in our media. Nothing.
Well,
And
no, of course, because the narrative is to protect, and we have a couple calls here, L.A. We've got 219 area code. We'll get you first. You're on Late Night in the Midlands. First name, where you're calling from, please.
How you doing? First name's Dominic, calling from Gary, Indiana.
Well, welcome aboard, Dominic.
Thanks, Michael. It's a pleasure to talk to you in L.A. as well.
Well, thank you. You're on
Mike.
with L.A., so shoot away.
Okay. L.A., my question is a two-parter. Number one, has there been any more information on the DNA tests that you and Brian Forrester did with the elongated skulls? And also, will you be heading back down to South America soon to do any more exploration?
The question is yes and yes. I'm not at liberty to really talk about stuff at the moment. We are in the process of being able to acquire samples and from multiple sources. That's all I can really say about it. There's no date set yet, but we're very confident that it's going to happen fairly soon. I can tell you this, that it's our contention that these elongated skulls are the result of some sort of an outside agency genetically manipulating the human genome. There was a film crew that came down from the UK and took a sample from a specimen called Y-Key, which is on the way to the Sacred Valley, and they had it tested, and the mitochondrial DNA came back fully human. The nuclear DNA from the father came back unknown. And this is what we're expecting to see. We're expecting to see anomalies all throughout the DNA, whether it's mitochondrial or nuclear. We're hoping also to be able to find out what haplogroup, and we're positing that the haplogroup it will show will be Middle Eastern, because that's where we think the Paracas people came from. So, look, we're on the trail. Not a lot to report yet. That I can tell you this, that we are going back down there more than likely sooner than later.
Right.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your call, Dominic. I appreciate it, and thank you for listening. Ira, you're up next.
Well, hi, guys. Nice to have you on here, L.A. It's really good to hear your thoughts on all of this stuff.
Thank you, Ira.
I wanted to get your thoughts on something in relation to prophecy. Now, I can't give you the exact quote because I cannot remember it right off the top of my head, but I know biblically it speaks about that the time basically has come to fruition when you see Damascus being destroyed. And I thought it was interesting that we're now heading into so much activity in Syria and, all of the things that are occurring over there with all of that. And it really gets me to thinking, okay, that's kind of the one thing that I've been waiting for to see what occurs because, Damascus has never been destroyed in its entire history. So what are your thoughts regarding that?
Oh, L.A.?
Oh, sorry. The prophecy you're talking about comes from the Isaiah 17 narrative, which says basically that Damascus has become a ruinous heap, and it happens very, very quickly.
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah. It's just another sign that's never happened. It's the prophecy which has never been fulfilled. Remember, what was written will come to pass. What was foretold will unfold. And that's a quote I came up with a while back. And I think it's very telling that Tsar Vladimir is in the Middle East now, specifically propping up Bashar al-Assad. We haven't seen the last of this thing yet. Damascus is in the crosshairs, pretty much of everybody. And it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out. But we know that prophecy, this is the sure word of the real God. And we know it's going to happen. I'm not making this stuff up. I wish it didn't happen. But it's written. And what was written will come to pass. What was foretold will unfold. And I find that very, very sobering. And, the church would do well to begin to start talking about the prophetic narrative. And it doesn't. Most churches ignore prophecy to their own peril, of course. Yeah,
I would say definitely so. Well, thank you so much for your thoughts on that. I just kind of wanted to see what you had. We'll talk soon.
All right.
So.
Thank you so much, Ira. I appreciate the call. And all right, so we've got some other questions here, L.A., and of course I will leave you time to get out anything that you like when we're done here. Chemtrails comes up, and with weather modification, this listener asks, can that explain the die-offs and the crazy weather? Just the plain weather modification and HAARP he's got here.
Well, yeah, I mean, the short answer to that is absolutely yes. I think that the chemtrails, first of all, when I'm in Peru, no chemtrails. Don't see one. They're not there, okay? Over Los Angeles, it's unbelievable. In Ohio, they've had record rainfall. I think it's weather modification. I think they're doing stuff with it. I think it's responsible maybe for the bee die-off. We talked about this in our DVD Watchers 9. The colony collapse. Colony hive collapse, and when necropsies are done on the bees, they find that these bees are having 100 times normal the amount of aluminum that shouldn't be there, and that's one of what they're spraying supposedly in the air: aluminum and barium. This deadly mixture. Is that responsible for the rise of autism? Is that responsible for the rise of Alzheimer's that we see? The short answer to that is yes. And it's funny how you show a person a chemtrail and they look at it, oh, that's just jet fuel.
I know.
It's just amazing. Oh, really? Let me get this straight. So jet fuel billows out over hours, right, and turns the sky milky white. I've been on the planet for 65 years, and I'm not going to buy the Brooklyn Bridge if it comes up for sale, okay? You're not going to sell me the Brooklyn Bridge, buddy. I know that plane up there is spraying something. Jet trails, contrails don't do that. They evaporate. Chemtrails linger and turn the sky milky white. Give me a break.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's why, I even had a guest on the other night who was fun to talk to, but there were certain things he did not buy into, 9/11 and such. And I know that listeners say, well, why didn't he correct them? Because I'm not bringing the guest on to argue with him. That 101 class, it's over. I'm not teaching it no more. It's it's time to move on. Those who want to sit there and wade in the water, well, let them be eaten by the sharks. You can only do what you can do. Now,
that's it. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. So Tess asks about giant bones, but I think I don't know if you've got enough time to really get into that. But ask L.A. about giant bones.
Well, we know that they're there in my book On the Trail of a Nephilim, Volume 2. And if you don't have that, and I know this sounds like a shameless plug, and in some ways it might be, but you need to check that out, because in that book On the Trail of a Nephilim, Volume 2. I was out in Catalina, and I discovered something there, which it's one of the very few pictures that we really have that validates not only the Native American tradition, but the idea of the biblical Nephilim. When I was out in Catalina, the backstory to this is Ralph Glidden was an archaeologist who performed primitive archaeological digs. He was hired by the High Museum, later to be gobbled up by the Smithsonian Institute. So he's employed by the High between 1919 and 1921. He's performing very primitive archaeological digs out in Catalina. His note-taking is haphazard at best, but his photographs lay in a cache of records for over 50 years. No one knew where they were. And they were discovered by the former curator of the Catalina Museum, John Borgina. I found out about it. I donated $1,000 to the new museum. I was allowed to look at all the records. I took copious photographs. I found pay dirt. I found elongated skulls. I found six fingers. I found giants. The one picture in particular is of a 9-footer that's been vetted by 3 different researchers who took the photograph of a photograph that I took. Okay, which shows Ralph Glidden standing in a recently excavated grave out on Catalina, and in front of him is a very large skeleton in situ. It's not a disarticulated bone pile. The skeleton is in situ. It's been uncovered in exactly the same way it was entombed, and we had 3 different people analyze it. All of them put it just around 9 feet. We rounded it down to 8 foot 6 inches. That skeleton, that picture was used on the History Channel's In Search of the Lost Giants on the History Channel with the Vieira brothers. I was on the finale of that. That is, and I was the guy who discovered the picture. They made it look like the Vieira brothers discovered the picture. My intellectual property. I discovered the picture, and doggone it, I want credit for it. You know, I was the guy that flew out there on a hunch. Why they found these records. Well, what's in the records? Well, we don't know. Well, okay, I'll fly out. And I flew out. I chartered a small private plane, flew out. You know, I spent $1,000 donation. I spent 10 hours poring over everything in the archives, and I got paid dirt. And it's published in On the Trail of a Nephilim, Volume 2. Folks, if you don't have that book, it'll blow your mind. Volume 1 and Volume 2 will blow your mind, I promise you. Nothing else like it.
And I've got listeners who are writing me left and right here, and they're saying that you've got to get your books and your trilogy because it's eye-opening, I'm being told. Another question here. We got several of them that are coming. I'm actually, I got two computers going here. All right, so we got Patrick asks, and I don't know how serious he is, but I think this is a serious question. Ask L.A. if the middle-class heterosexual Caucasian is a vanishing breed.
Absolutely. Are you kidding me? The media is at war with the white heterosexual middle class male. Are you kidding me? Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's what's been eradicated in the last 15, 20 years. There's a war on the white man. There's a war on the white middle class guy. There's a war on the entrepreneur. If you're a businessman, if you're an entrepreneur, the entire tax structure is against you. Period. And that's where we are.
Well, yeah, and you're right. But you know, sometimes people, they've got agendas behind those questions. But
sure they do.
But no, it was a serious question because he's wrote again. But I got to move on and get to others' questions. Laura says they, and puts it in parentheses, are the ones who allowed the knowledge to filter into our lives. Who says any of it is true? She says because they have allowed us to see it.
I'm not sure what she's getting at here.
I think she's talking about the prophecies that the people who are in charge, per se, the elites, allowed us to have this information, so shouldn't we be skeptical about it, basically, I think is what she's saying.
Well, what's happening, if you go back and you look at the historical narrative all through history, you'll find out that Robert Tyndale was first killed and burned at the stake, and his ashes scattered over the land for translating the Bible, okay, from Latin into English so the common man could read it. Okay. So it's exactly the opposite of what you think, that the scriptures were kept from the people. The scriptures were kept from the people. And Tyndale and others like him, and Martin Luther and others like him, stood up and said, wait a minute, this is wrong. And that's why these men were killed. These men were killed for trying to get the Bible into the hands of the common man. The Bible is true. The prophecies are true. What was written will come to pass. What was foretold will unfold. You can't fudge this stuff. You can't write that in the latter days I will regather Israel, the Jews, from the four corners of the earth and reestablish them in their homeland. I'm not making that up. And it's there in the biblical prophetic narrative, and it has already come to pass. Astounding.
I see. All right. Scrappy. Scrappy says Planet X is getting very close. That's why you're hearing about a lot of asteroids passing close to Earth lately in the news. And he says, your thoughts, L.A.?
Well, it is very interesting. There's a lot of stuff that is coming by, a lot of asteroids, a lot of comets. That's not Planet X, though. Planet X is supposed to be 7 times larger, like Gil Broussard talks about. He calls it 7X. 7 times larger than the moon, that's really big. That's something just huge. But we're not seeing any evidence of that. I'm not a big Planet X fan. I think it's something else. Look, the signs are all here, and we don't have to have Planet X to have what we're already seeing. I mean, the volcanic activity, the earthquakes, the wars and rumors of wars, the weird weather patterns that we're seeing, everything that's been prophesied is firing on all 8 cylinders.
Okay, and last but not least, Harn says, "Thank you, Mr. Marzulli, for he that's how he spelled it for your work and ongoing research to bring out the truth of what is coming upon man, the end game." And thank you very much, he says.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Thank you. All glory to the King.
All right, well, L.A., we're getting down to the last few minutes here, so what I want to do is give you the floor to get out any information that you like, and I thank you so much. This has been a great hour, and we'll have to do this again sometime and go a little longer.
Absolutely. I'd love to do it, and, we're going to start advertising on your show, and I'm not sure whether you've got Watchers 9 in the book, but if you shoot me your address, we'll definitely get those out to you. Because I think when you look at the Watchers 9, it's almost 2 hours long. There's so much information there. I'd love to come back and talk about that in more detail. And if you shoot me your address, Michael, we'll get that over to you, and you can avail yourself of it. Here's the deal. At the end of Watchers 9, I look right in the camera and I say, if you think you know Jesus, but you don't know him, you don't know him. What I mean by that, I'm not talking about, church steeples and cathedrals and popes with costumes and all this other stuff. That's not who he is. If you think you know him, but you don't know him, then you don't know him. And he's the Prince of Peace, and he will change your life. When you ask him to come in, he will come in. He will sup with you, and you will be your life will change in ways that I can't even describe. It happened to me 35 years ago when I asked him in. My life has never been the same. And it's just a short prayer away. And all you say is, I've done stuff in my life which I'm not proud of. Will you forgive me of those? I believe you came and died in my place. And your blood on Calvary forgives me of all my little nasties. Please give me eternal life and come into my life now and change it. And that's what we get. We get eternal life. So if you don't know him, if you think you know him, but you don't know him, ask him in today. Folks, you can go to my website, L.A.MARZILLI.net, avail yourself of the Days of Chaos, the book, and also the DVD by the same title. I promise you, you will not be disappointed. There is so much vital, cutting-edge information in both the book and the DVD. You'll want to avail yourself. Hold a watcher's party, invite your family and friends over, sit down, don't get paranoid, arm yourself with information. Information is knowledge, and in that knowledge, you can decide, maybe I should get a bug-out plan. Maybe I should stockpile 4 to 6 months' worth of food. Maybe I should have a group of people who are like-minded to coalesce in case of an emergency. All good thoughts, folks. Michael, thanks so much for having me on the show. A pleasure. Shoot me your address, and I'll send that stuff off to you.
Thank you so much, L.A. I'll do that right after the show, and I appreciate everything that you do. Keep on keeping on, brother.
Certainly will be. Take care, guys. Thanks so much.
All right, have a great night. So there he goes, folks. L.A. Marzulli. He has
He brings up Job, and then we see whirlwinds that happen. Great winds come in and blow the house down. We see all of a sudden that this band of Sabaeans decide to just attack Job's children. Job is stricken with this horrible disease, and I don't know how it goes. Look, I don't want to give the devil too much credit. On the other hand, I want to underestimate what we're dealing with here. The fact that the volcanic activity is waking up is alarming. The fact that, and Jesus warns us of this. He doesn't say anything about Planet X. He just tells us there's a laundry list, and this is what both the Days of Chaos, the book, and the Watchers 9, Days of Chaos, is basically built on. The words of Jesus, which tell us, in no uncertain terms, do not be deceived. First thing out of his mouth. Do not be deceived. Many will come in my name and claim that I am the Messiah. That in itself is an absurd statement to make, because 2,000 years ago, there is no church, there's no PR firm, there's nothing. There's no stained glass windows, monks with funny haircuts, rosary beads, nunneries, none of this stuff. Confessional boxes, Billy Graham, Christian TV, nothing exists. There's Judaism, which is basically locked into what is Israel today. It's pretty much there. The temple is still working when Yeshua is there. And, of course, that's the one time we see that he really gets ticked off, and he makes a whip, and he drives the money changers out of a temple. But, again, I digress. The bottom line is this, Savior, and my life has never been the same since. I was always interested in that. It just kind of blew me away that there was someone outside space-time as we know it, and just like the Bible said, who could tell us the beginning before the end, call out the beginning before the end and the end before the beginning. And I just found that absolutely incredible, and I was drawn to it. And so the idea of prophecy and understanding prophecy and knowing the prophetic narrative from the Bible basically has colored everything I do. Most of the books have a prophetic thread to them. The new book, obviously, and of course Watchers 9, both of them are entitled Days of Chaos, but they deal with different subject matters. So it's not like they don't really overlap that much. For instance, in Watchers 9, we talk about electromagnetic pulse weapons with Dr. Brooks Agnew. I also touch on that in the book. I discussed very much in the book volcanic activity, and in Watchers 9, we interviewed a man by the name of Alvin Conway, who's got a record-breaking blog called The Extinction Protocol. And Alvin talks about volcanoes. But you know what's interesting is both projects are really very much standalone projects, and you can watch one and enjoy the book without necessarily having the other one. But we recommend both at the same.
L.A. Back to late night in the Midlands. L.A.MARZILLI, how are you, my friend?
In the Midlands, I'm good, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you tonight. A lot going on in our world, isn't there?
Oh my gosh, too much. How long are we on for? An hour?
Yeah, we got you. We got you for an hour tonight. And L.A., I thought we'd start with a little bit of background briefly. And
Okay.
What got you so interested in all this? Because obviously you have to have an interest to get where you've gotten with it. You've done a lot of work in these areas.
Well, that's true. Right from the get-go, 35 years ago, I was drawn to the biblical prophetic narrative. In other words, those passages of Scripture which call out events in the future. Many of those events have not happened even now as we speak. For instance, the construction of a third temple, the revealing of the Antichrist, the anti-Messiah. Those are just two prophetic events. The Ezekiel 38 war, the Psalm 83 war, the Isaiah 17 destruction of Damascus, to name a few more. Those prophetic passages have not been fulfilled yet. And I was drawn to the biblical prophetic narrative 35 years ago when I first came to Jesus and confessed him as my Lord. And 2012 thing, which never happened. We didn't see anything. In fact, Richard even showed us in the Watchers, in one of our Watchers, how you create lens flares and what lens flares are. Lots of stuff out there, but they're lens flares. They're camera anomalies. Some of them are just atmospheric anomalies. I'm not seeing any Planet X. Look, if it's there, and Gil Broussard is correct, we're supposed to see this thing in March. I just received an email fairly recently in the last couple of days saying, oh, guess what? Gil's calculations are wrong. We're going to see it in January. Look, the bottom line is something's going on. We all understand that. I think there's a supernatural component to everything that we're seeing. I'm a frank supernaturalist. And I don't blame it on Planet X. I blame it on the dark agenda of the fallen cherub, Satan. The rebellion happened millennia ago. We don't know how far back it goes. I think it's a lot farther back than most people want to believe. But I digress. The bottom line is, I think that we're looking at supernatural forces which are operating on the planet. Oh, Ellie, that's ridiculous. You're tell me supernatural forces and volcanic activity? Absolutely, why not? And here's the reason. When we get back into the biblical prophetic narrative, we read that in the book of Job specifically, that the fallen cherub is walking around the face of the earth, and he sees Job, and he same time.
I see. So, last days of chaos. Now, would that be space related? Because always the topic of Planet X comes up, and people, no matter what guest I have on, I will always get messages. Ask him about Planet X. Does he know about Planet X? And so this chaos that's happening now. I mean, we've got a lot going on. We've got everything from the weather to wars. Can't blame the wars on something like Planet X, I don't think, but. The weather and stuff. Is it? Would this be related to something off of planet, or is this just an evil force that has gripped our planet?
Great question, and you're right. You know, Planet X, as my business partner and producer, director of the Watcher series, Richard Shaw, would tell you that Planet X just won't go away. I mean, it just doesn't go away. We interviewed Marshall Masters in one of our Watchers years ago during the 2012, and Marshall was convinced that Planet X was coming in and we would see it in 2012. It was the end of the world. Well, it didn't happen. Gil Broussard, who is perhaps in some ways one of the foremost what's the word, expositors on Planet X. We interviewed him for Watchers 9. It's an incredible interview. I'm a skeptic, and here's why. You know, fool me once, shame on you, fool me
too.
twice, right? And I got fooled with the